The slap echoed through the hushed cabin of Aura Wing Flight 732 like a gunshot. For a frozen second, the only sound was the drone of the engines at 35,000 feet. Every eye was locked on the scene in the aisle, a senior flight attendant, her face a mask of furious indignation, standing over a black woman in a simple grey tracksuit who was now calmly touching her cheek. The flight attendant, Heather Jensen, had just committed an act of career suicide. What she didn't know, what no one in that cabin could possibly imagine, was that the passenger she had just assaulted wasn't just another customer. She was Dr. Kendra Sullivan, the new and very private CEO of Aura Wing Airlines. The karma that was about to unfold would be as swift and brutal as the strike itself. The journey began like any other for Dr. Kendra Sullivan. To the other passengers filtering onto the Tuesday morning flight from New York to San Francisco, she was utterly unremarkable. Dressed in charcoal grey joggers and a matching zip-up hoodie with a pair of well-worn sneakers, she could have been a college student or a weary traveller heading home. There was no designer luggage, no flashy watch, just a simple leather-bound book and a pair of noise-cancelling headphones. This anonymity was deliberate. Kendra had taken the helm of Aura Wing Airlines just 6 months prior, inheriting a company with a stellar safety record, but a customer service reputation that was in a nosedive. Complaints of rude staff, nickel and diming, and a general sense of passenger disdain were flooding the corporate offices. Instead of relying on filtered reports and sanitized presentations from her executive team, Kendra believed in seeing the truth for herself. This was her 4th undercover flight, a chance to experience her own airline from the perspective of a regular paying customer in economy class. She found her seat, 24B, a middle seat she'd intentionally booked. As she settled in, she observed the cabin crew. Most were professional, if a bit rushed. Then she saw Heather Jensen. Heather was a senior flight attendant with over 20 years of service under her belt. She moved with an air of ownership, her smile a thin, practiced veneer that didn't quite reach her eyes. Kendra watched as Heather dealt with a young couple trying to fit their carry-on into an already full overhead bin. "It's not going to fit. You'll have to check it," Heather said, her tone clipped and devoid of patience. "But the agent at the gate said it was fine," the young man replied, flustered. "The agent at the gate isn't here, is she?" "I am. And I'm telling you it's not fitting." "Give it to me," she snapped, yanking the bag from his hands with unnecessary force. She tagged it and shoved it towards the jet bridge door without another word, leaving the couple looking embarrassed and angry. Kendra made a mental note. Attitude, dismissive, aggressive. Resolution, poor. The boarding process continued, and Kendra saw a pattern. Heather was warm and effusive with the business-class passengers she passed, offering a "Welcome back, Mr. Peterson," and a charming laugh for another. But for the passengers in the back, her demeanor was cold, impatient, and judgmental. She sized people up in an instant, and her internal verdict dictated her treatment of them. When Heather reached Kendra's row, she paused. An elderly woman in the window seat, 24A, was struggling with her seatbelt. "Excuse me, miss, could you help me with this buckle?" "My arthritis is acting up today," the woman asked softly. Heather let out an audible theatrical sigh. "Ma'am, I have a whole cabin to board. You push the metal part into the other part until it clicks. It's not complicated." She made no move to help, instead turning her attention to the passenger in the aisle seat. The elderly woman, face flushed with shame, fumbled with the belt until her roommate, a kind-faced man, reached over and helped her. Kendra's jaw tightened. This was worse than the report suggested. This wasn't just poor service. It was a complete lack of basic human decency. As the flight prepared for takeoff, Kendra took out her phone to send a quick text to her Chief Operating Officer, David Chen. AW 732. Cabin service in Section 3 is abysmal. Senior Attendant H. Jensen. Documenting. She put her phone into airplane mode just as Heather's sharp voice cut through the air again. "Mum, phone's off." Now, Heather barked, gesturing at Kendra from the aisle. There was no "please," no polite request, just a harsh command. Kendra gave a small nod and slipped the phone into her seat-back pocket. She decided to engage to test the limits of the service. She pressed the call button. A few moments later, Heather appeared, her expression already laced with annoyance. "Yes. Hello. I was wondering if I could possibly get a bottle of water. I have a bit of a headache and forgot to grab one at the gate," Kendra asked, in a polite, even tone. Heather stared at her for a long second. "The beverage service will begin after we reach cruising altitude. You'll have to wait." "I understand. I'd be happy to pay for it now, if that's the issue. I just get migraines and hydrating early helps." Heather's eyes narrowed, performing a swift, condescending scan of Kendra's simple attire. "We don't do a la carte service before takeoff. You need to turn off your light and wait like everyone else," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. She reached up and jabbed the call button off before turning on her heel and marching back to her jump seat. The man in 24C looked over at Kendra and rolled his eyes in solidarity. "Her charm is just overwhelming, isn't it?" he whispered. Kendra offered a tight, knowing smile. She settled back into her seat, her mind no longer on a simple fact-finding mission. A storm was gathering inside her, a cold, calculated anger. This wasn't just about one rude employee. This was about a toxic culture that she had been hired to eradicate. And Heather Jensen had just nominated herself as the prime example. The flight had barely begun, but Kendra knew it was going to be a memorable one. Once the plane reached its cruising altitude, the cabin crew began the beverage service. Heather commanded the cart in Kendra's section, her movements sharp and efficient. When she reached row 24, she served the man on the aisle and the elderly woman at the window without a word, then looked at Kendra expectantly. "I'll have a bottle of water and the vegetarian snack box, please," Kendra said. Heather smirked, a small, cruel twitch of her lips. "Let me see your boarding pass." Kendra, though slightly taken aback by the unusual request for a simple purchase, retrieved it. "Here you go." Heather glanced at it. "You're in a standard economy seat. The snack boxes are complimentary for premium economy only. For you, it's $12.99. Her tone implied that this was a sum Kendra would likely find prohibitive. "That's perfectly fine," Kendra replied, pulling out her credit card. "I'll take it." Heather ran the card, practically throwing the snack box and water bottle onto Kendra's tray table. The transaction was cold, transactional, and designed to be demeaning. As Heather moved on, Kendra opened the box. Inside was a sad-looking turkey sandwich. She calmly pressed the call button again. A minute later, Heather returned, her face thunderous. "What is it now?" "I'm sorry to bother you again," Kendra said, maintaining her composure. "I ordered the vegetarian box. This has turkey in it." Heather snatched the box and looked inside, as if Kendra was lying. "We probably ran out of the vegetarian ones. This is all we have left in this cart. Could you possibly check the other cart? Or perhaps in the galley I pre-ordered a vegetarian meal for this flight, so it should be on the manifest." This was the breaking point. For Heather, this unassuming woman in the middle seat represented everything she resented. The entitled passenger who didn't know their place, who made constant demands, who didn't look like they belonged, but acted as if they owned the plane. Her carefully constructed professional facade began to crack, revealing the raw prejudice beneath. "Listen," Heather hissed, leaning down so her face was just inches from Kendra's. Her voice was low, but it carried an unmistakable venom that made the passengers nearby fall silent. "I don't know who you think you are. You've been a problem since you stepped on this plane. constant demands, special requests. People like you are always trying to get something for free, always complaining. You get what you're given, or you get nothing. Do you understand me? The phrase "people like you" hung in the air thick and unambiguous. It was a loaded, racially charged insinuation, and Kendra felt a familiar, cold fire ignite in her chest. This was the same coded language she'd faced her entire career, from engineering school to the corporate boardroom. She looked directly into Heather's eyes. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer just polite. It was steady, firm, and resonant, with an authority that Heather had never encountered from a passenger in coach. "What you need to understand," Kendra said slowly and clearly, "is that I am a paying customer on this airline. I am entitled to the service I paid for and to be treated with a baseline of professional respect. Your behavior has been unacceptable since the moment I boarded. Now please find the meal I ordered, or I will be forced to file a formal complaint." A nearby passenger, a young man named Ben Carter, in seat 23D, had been watching the entire exchange with growing disbelief. Sensing a major confrontation, he discreetly lifted his phone, angling it to record. Heather was stunned by Kendra's direct and articulate rebuke. Her authority had been challenged, and in her mind, her superiority had been questioned by someone she deemed inferior. All her years of pent-up resentment, her personal frustrations, and her deep-seated bigotry boiled over in a single catastrophic moment of impulse. "How dare you?" Heather snarled. "You will not speak to me that way." And then she did it. She raised her hand, and with a sharp, cracking sound, slapped Kendra across the face. The cabin went dead silent. The slap was so loud, so shocking, it seemed to suck all the air out of the plane. The elderly woman next to Kendra gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The man on the aisle stared, his mouth agape. Across the aisle, Ben Carter's phone was still recording, capturing the raw, ugly truth of the moment. Kendra didn't flinch or cry out. She simply sat there for a beat, the stinging imprint of Heather's hand blooming on her cheek. She slowly turned her head back to face the flight attendant, and her eyes were like chips of ice. The anger was gone, replaced by something far more terrifying, absolute glacial calm. Heather, realizing the magnitude of what she had done, took a half step back. A flicker of panic entered her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a desperate attempt at self-justification. She was being aggressive. "She threatened me," she blurted out to the stunned cabin. Kendra said nothing. She simply raised a single steady finger and pressed the call button above her head one last time. This time, she wasn't summoning a flight attendant. She was summoning a reckoning. The unraveling was complete. The fallout was about to begin. The lead flight attendant, a man named Robert, hurried over his face, etched with concern. "What's going on here?" I heard shouting. "This passenger became aggressive and threatened me," Heather said immediately, her voice high and shaky as she tried to seize control of the narrative. "She was unruly. I felt unsafe. We need to have her restrained and met by authorities on the ground." Several passengers immediately began to protest. "That's not what happened," shouted Ben Carter from the row ahead. "She was completely calm. You assaulted her. I have it on video." Robert looked from Heather's panicked face to Kendra's stoic expression and the red mark blooming on her cheek. He was experienced enough to know a situation spiraling out of control. "Okay, Heather, go to the forward galley." "Now," he instructed firmly. He then knelt by Kendra's seat. "Mum, are you all right?" "I am so sorry. Can I get you some ice?" "I am physically unharmed," Kendra replied, her voice level and devoid of emotion. "However, an assault has taken place. I need you to follow protocol and immediately inform the captain of the situation." "Of course," Robert said, his professionalism a stark contrast to Heather's meltdown. "I'll be right back. I am required to notify the flight deck of any physical altercation." As Robert moved towards the cockpit, the cabin buzzed with whispers. Passengers were pulling out their phones, some describing what they saw in texts, others airdropping Ben Carter's video to those nearby. The digital wildfire had begun before the plane had even started its descent. In the forward galley, Heather was having a full-blown meltdown, justifying her actions to the other crew members. You saw her. She kept pushing, kept demanding things. She had this look in her eye. I had to defend myself. A few minutes later, the cockpit door opened and Captain Frank Miller emerged. He was a veteran pilot, a man with a stern, no-nonsense demeanor who had seen almost everything in his 30 years of flying. Robert quickly briefed him, and the captain's face grew grimmer with every word. Captain Miller walked down the aisle, his presence commanding immediate silence. He stopped at row 24, his eyes taking in the scene. He addressed Kendra with formal gravity. "Ma'am, my lead attendant informed me there was an incident. He alleges you were assaulted by a member of my crew. Can you confirm this?" "That is correct, Captain," Kendra said. Heather, seeing the captain, rushed out from the galley. "Captain Miller, she was the aggressor. She was unruly and I felt threatened. Company policy states." The captain held up a hand, silencing her instantly. "Ms. Jensen, return to the galley and do not speak unless I speak to you. That's an order." Heather recoiled, as if struck her face, paling and retreated. Captain Miller turned back to Kendra. "Ma'am, I have to ask for your side of the story for my report, and I'll need your name and information. We will have law enforcement meeting us at the gate in San Francisco." "I appreciate your diligence, Captain," Kendra said. She reached into the small backpack at her feet, past her book and a laptop, and retrieved a simple black wallet. She opened it and removed 2 cards. One was her driver's license. The other was a slim black corporate ID card. She handed them both to him. "My name is Kendra Sullivan," she said. The captain glanced at the driver's license, nodding. "Thank you, Miss Sullivan." Then his eyes flickered to the other card in his hand. He read the text printed beneath her photo. "Dr. Kendra Sullivan, Chief Executive Officer, Aura Wing Airlines, Global Holdings Inc. Time seemed to stop. Captain Miller froze his eyes, widening almost imperceptibly. He read the card again, then a third time, as if the words were in a foreign language his brain couldn't process. His gaze lifted slowly from the small piece of plastic to the face of the woman in the middle seat, the woman in the grey tracksuit with a red handprint on her cheek. The cogs in his mind turned, connecting the dots with horrifying speed. The undercover boss rumors that had been swirling for months, the recent company-wide emails from the new unseen CEO. The name. His military straight posture seemed to wilt. The blood drained from his face. The authority he had carried down the aisle evaporated, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. "Dr. Sullivan," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. From the galley, Heather watched the exchange, her bravado turning to confusion, and then to a creeping, sickening dread as she saw the captain's reaction. Why would the captain look so scared? Kendra simply nodded at the captain, her expression unchanged. "Hello, Frank. We haven't been formally introduced. I was planning to visit the SFO Flight Operations Center next month, but it seems my schedule has opened up." The captain swallowed hard, the ID card trembling slightly in his hand. He felt like he was falling. He was the commander of a multi-million-dollar aircraft responsible for hundreds of souls, but in that moment, he felt like a schoolboy caught smoking behind the gym. He finally found his voice, which was now filled with a new, profound level of gravity. "I see. Dr. Sullivan, I am profoundly sorry. This is inexcusable." Kendra took her ID back from his numb fingers. "The failure, Captain, is systemic, but the assault was personal. Please have Miss Jensen confined to the forward galley for the remainder of the flight. Have corporate security meet us at the gate along with the standard law enforcement, and inform the tower we will not be delayed. I run a tight ship and I expect my planes to be on time." The captain could only nod his mind, reeling. He turned and walked back toward the cockpit, his steps heavy. He paused at the galley, his eyes locking with Heather's. She looked at him, desperate for validation for him to take her side. Instead, he just stared at her. His face a mixture of pity and fury. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he said, his voice low and guttural. And in that moment, seeing the utter terror in her captain's eyes, Heather Jensen finally understood. The passenger in 24B wasn't just another problem. She was the one who signed every single paycheck. She was the one who held the fate of all 20,000 Aura Wing employees in her hands. And Heather had just slapped her boss, the CEO, in front of 200 witnesses and at least one video camera. It wasn't just a mistake. It was annihilation. The remainder of the flight was thick with a tense, surreal silence. Heather Jensen was sequestered in the forward galley, guarded by another flight attendant, her face a ghostly white mask of dawning horror. The other crew members moved through the cabin like automatons, avoiding eye contact with anyone, their faces reflecting a mixture of fear and second-hand shame. News of the CEO's identity spread through the crew like a shockwave. Kendra, for her part, remained in her seat, projecting an aura of impossible calm. She accepted the ice pack Robert offered, holding it gently to her cheek while she opened her book and began to read. To any observer, she looked like a woman mildly inconvenienced. Internally, however, her mind was racing at 1,000 miles per hour. The undercover mission was over. CEO mode was now fully engaged. She reconnected her phone to the plane's Wi-Fi, the exorbitant fee a comical irony. A flood of messages poured in. The first was from David Chen, her COO. David urgent. Seeing chatter about an incident on AW32. Reports of an assault. Please confirm you are okay. Kendra, I'm fine. The reports are true. I was the passenger who was assaulted. By Senior FA Heather Jensen. Video is likely already circulating. David's reply was almost instantaneous. David, my God, I'm so sorry, Kendra. What do you need legal PR security? I'm activating the crisis team now. Kendra, all of it. Have corporate security meet the plane. No sirens, no fuss at the gate. I want this handled discreetly on our end. SFO station manager, head of security, and our regional counsel on the ground. Law enforcement will be there. Let them do their job first. I want Jensen's employee file, including all commendations and complaints on my desk within the hour. And get PR ready. Acknowledge the incident promise of full investigation, but release no names. Emphasize our commitment to passenger and crew safety. As the plane began its final descent into San Francisco, Ben Carter, the passenger who had filmed the incident, was already uploading the 47-second clip to his social media channels. He was a tech blogger with a modest but engaged following. He tagged Aura Wing Airlines and added a simple, devastating caption: Aura Wing flight attendant slaps a passenger for asking for her correct meal. Unbelievable. Aura Wing assault, shall flying while black. By the time Flight 732 touched down on the tarmac, the video had been viewed over 50,000 times. By the time it taxied to the gate, that number had surpassed 500,000. News outlets, always hungry for viral content, were ripping the video and embedding it in articles with incendiary headlines. The storm had broken online before Kendra had even unbuckled her seatbelt. As the jet bridge connected, an announcement came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please remain in your seats. Law enforcement and airline officials will be boarding the aircraft. Please remain seated until you are instructed to deplane. The doors opened to reveal not just the usual gate agents, but two uniformed police officers, a stern-looking man in a sharp suit, or a wing's head of corporate security, Mark Riley, and the SFO station manager, whose face was pale with anxiety. The police officers boarded first and were directed by Captain Miller to the front galley. Heather Jensen was escorted off the plane, her face ashen, refusing to look at anyone. She was not in handcuffs, but the humiliation was absolute. Next, Mark Riley approached Kendra's Rao. "Dr. Sullivan," he said in a low, respectful voice, "I'm Mark Riley. We're here for you. Please let us escort you off." Kendra stood, and for the first time the entire cabin got a clear view of the new CEO. She nodded to the passengers around her, a silent acknowledgement of their witness. Her eyes briefly met Ben Carter's. He gave a slight, affirming nod, holding up his phone for a split second. Kendra understood. The evidence was safe. She was whisked away through a private jet bridge exit, bypassing the terminal and the inevitable gawking and phone cameras. She was taken to the Aura Wing corporate offices at the airport, a sterile conference room already prepared for her. David Chen was on the large video screen, his face a portrait of controlled crisis. "Kendra, the video is everywhere," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "CNN and Fox News have already called. It's the #1 trending topic on X." "It was bound to happen," Kendra replied calmly, finally taking a sip of the water someone had placed before her. "What's the status on Jensen?" "She's been detained for questioning by airport police. Assault is a federal crime in the air. Her union rep is already on his way. Her career is over, that's the easy part. The hard part is the narrative, Kendra. The headlines are already framing this racially." "They're not wrong," Kendra stated flatly. Her language was coded but clear. "People like you. This isn't just about one employee having a bad day. This is a cultural cancer I was hired to excise. Now the whole world gets to watch the surgery." She leaned forward, her voice steely, all traces of the weary passenger gone. "This is what we do. We get ahead of it. I'll give a full statement to the police. We issue a formal apology to myself as the passenger and to all our customers. We suspend Heather Jensen without pay, pending the outcome of the full investigation. And David," she paused, "I want you to pull the service records and passenger complaints for every flight she has worked for the past 5 years. I have a feeling Ms. Jensen has left a trail of breadcrumbs." Kendra knew the next 48 hours would be a brutal gauntlet of legal proceedings, media frenzies, and corporate damage control. The slap was the inciting incident, but the real battle for the soul and reputation of her airline had just begun. Within hours, the machine of corporate defense and organized labor ground into motion, setting the stage for a bitter conflict. Heather Jensen bailed out, and awaiting formal charges, was immediately embraced by her union, the Federated Flight Attendants Coalition FFAC. Her union representative, a pugnacious old-school brawler named George Finley, saw this not as a clear-cut case of assault, but as a PR war to be won. Their strategy was audacious and ugly discredit the victim. George Finley held a press conference on the steps of the Union Hall the next day. He stood beside a tearful, carefully coached Heather Jensen. Ms. Jensen is a dedicated 22-year veteran of the airline industry with a spotless record. Finley boomed into the cluster of microphones. She is a mother, a wife, and a consummate professional who was pushed to her breaking point by a difficult and provocative passenger. We have witness statements from other crew members that this passenger, Ms. Sullivan, was argumentative and non-compliant from the moment she boarded. It was a classic blame the victim narrative, but with a new, dangerous twist. Unnamed sources likely planted by Finley's team began whispering to tabloid journalists. Stories emerged painting Kendra as an aggressive corporate raider, known for her hostile management style. They leaked a heavily redacted performance review of a pilot she had fired for a safety violation, twisting it to suggest she was vindictive. The narrative they tried to build was that Kendra, the powerful CEO, had intentionally goaded a working-class flight attendant into a confrontation, perhaps to make a point or to justify mass layoffs. It was a desperate, cynical ploy to reframe Heather as the true victim. Inside Aura Wing Tower, Kendra and her team watched the press conference with a mixture of disgust and cold fury. "A spotless record," David Chen scoffed, looking at a thick file on the conference table. "David, what did you find?" Kendra asked. "A trail of breadcrumbs, just like you said," he replied, sliding the file across the table. "Heather Jensen has 17 passenger complaints filed against her in the last 3 years alone. 12 of those complaints were from passengers of color. The language is all the same: rude, dismissive, condescending, aggressive. She was formally written up twice, but each time the union fought it and got it reduced to a verbal warning. She was a protected problem." Kendra read through the complaints, her expression hardening. A black family accused her of refusing to help with their baby stroller. A Hispanic businessman claimed she'd lost his pre-ordered meal and told him to eat what everyone else is eating. An Asian student said Heather had mocked her accent. "She wasn't just having a bad day," Kendra said softly. "She's a serial offender who was enabled by a system that protects seniority over decency." The union's next move was even more insidious. They filed a formal grievance against Aura Wing, claiming an unsafe work environment and alleging that Kendra had violated FAA regulations by using her phone during taxiing, a complete fabrication, and had created the confrontation. They demanded Heather's full reinstatement with back pay and a formal apology from the company. They're trying to muddy the waters, create a "he said, she said" scenario where the truth gets lost in the noise, Aura Wing's General Counsel Maria Flores advised. "They're betting we'll want to avoid a protracted public fight and settle." Kendra leaned back in her chair. "They're making a mistake. They think they're fighting a faceless corporation that will do a cost-benefit analysis and write a check. They don't realize they're fighting me. And I don't settle when I'm right," Maria countersue. "File a civil suit against Ms. Jensen for assault and battery on behalf of the company, citing reputational damage. And we cooperate fully with the federal prosecutor. No deals." The real turning point, however, came from an unexpected source. Ben Carter, the tech blogger, was horrified by the union's smear campaign. He released a second longer video, one that included the moments before the slap. It clearly showed Heather's condescending remarks, her aggressive posture, and Kendra's calm, measured responses. He also did a live stream, speaking with raw emotion. "I saw the whole thing," he told his now massive audience. "That woman, Dr. Sullivan, was a model of patience. Heather Jensen was the aggressor from start to finish. Her union is lying. Don't let them gaslight you. This was not a provoked attack. This was an abuse of power." Ben's video, combined with his heartfelt testimony, cut through the union's narrative like a hot knife. But the final nail in Heather's coffin was delivered by the other passengers of Flight 732. Spurred by Ben's integrity, over a dozen of them, including the elderly woman from seat 24A and the man from 24C, gave official statements to the FBI and to Aura Wing's legal team. Their accounts were unanimous and damning. They described Heather's hostility, her unprofessionalism, and the unprovoked nature of the assault. The union's house of cards collapsed. The The witness statements from the other crew members were exposed as coerced and embellished. George Finley was suddenly dodging reporters' calls. The public, armed with irrefutable video and a chorus of eyewitnesses, turned on Heather with a vengeance. For Heather Jensen, the world was shrinking. She was trapped in a prison of her own making, built by a single hateful act. The union could posture and lie, but they couldn't erase the video. They couldn't silence 200 witnesses. The fight wasn't over, but her fate was sealed. The only thing left was the fall. The legal and corporate machinery, once greased by union interference, now moved with the brutal efficiency of a guillotine. The dam of support that had protected Heather Jensen for years didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The first sign came not in a formal letter, but in a terse, uncomfortable phone call from George Finley, the union representative who had so belligerently defended her just days earlier. "Heather, it's George." His voice, once a confident boom, was now a strained, bureaucratic monotone. "Listen, the National Executive Board has reviewed the case. Given the overwhelming video evidence and the sheer number of passenger witnesses who have come forward, our position has become untenable." Heather stood in her kitchen, the phone pressed hard against her ear. "Untenable. What does that mean, George? You said you would fight for me. You said she was an aggressive passenger. What I said was based on the initial crew reports." He replied the words carefully chosen, surgically removing himself from any culpability. "The additional evidence doesn't support that claim. We can't spend union capital on a case we are certain to lose. It's not a good use of our members' dues. I'm sorry, Heather. The FFAC is officially withdrawing its grievance and its representation." The click on the other end of the line was the loudest sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of a door slamming shut, locking her in a room with the consequences of her actions. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The first hammer fell a week later. She was summoned to a termination hearing at an anonymous corporate office park near the airport. The room was cold and sterile, dominated by a long, polished table that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights. On one side sat Aura Wing's head of human resources, a vice president of in-flight services, and a stony-faced corporate lawyer. On the other side sat Heather and the beleaguered, court-appointed attorney who was all she could now afford. She felt small a specimen under a microscope. The vice president, a woman Heather had once tried to impress at a company gala, began to read from a prepared statement in a dispassionate voice. The words were a clinical evisceration of her career. Violation of Section 4 of the Aura Wing Code of Conduct Unprofessional Behavior. Violation of Section 7 Passenger Endangerment. Violation of Federal Air Marshal regulations regarding in-flight altercations. Gross insubordination. And finally, physical assault against a passenger identified as Dr. Kendra Sullivan. Heather flinched at the name. In her mind, the woman in the grey tracksuit still felt like an anonymous problem passenger, not the architect of her doom. Her lawyer had advised her to stay silent to show remorse, but a lifetime of indignant pride was a hard habit to break. "Do you have anything to say in your defense, Miss Jensen?" The HR director asked, her eyes devoid of sympathy. Heather swallowed her throat dry. She looked at their impassive faces, searching for a glimmer of understanding, a trace of the us versus them solidarity she had always felt with management against difficult passengers. She found none. All she saw were judges. "I was having a bad day." She finally muttered the words, sounding feeble and pathetic even to her own ears. "The pressure, the constant demands, she pushed me." The corporate lawyer didn't even blink. "A bad day does not excuse a federal crime. The decision of this board is unanimous. Your employment with Aura Wing Airlines is terminated effective immediately. It was an execution, They detailed the fallout, her 2 decades of seniority erased, her coveted travel benefits for life revoked. Her 401k would be paid out, but her pension was being frozen, pending the outcome of the company's civil suit against her. She was instructed to surrender her company ID and all pieces of her uniform. The act of sliding the plastic card across the polished table felt like giving up her own identity. A security guard, polite but firm, escorted her from the building, a single cardboard box containing a few personal effects from her locker pressed into her arms. As she stepped out into the glaring sunlight, she had never felt more invisible. The second hammer was the United States legal system. In a quiet federal courtroom, she pleaded guilty to a single count of simple assault. Her lawyer had assured her a plea would likely result in minimal punishment, but the judge, a stern woman named Alice Chen, had seen the video. Ms. Jensen. Judge Chen began looking down from the bench. A flight attendant holds a unique position of trust and authority. You are a first responder, a safety officer, and the face of the airline. You are entrusted with the care of hundreds of souls in a vulnerable environment. You did not just strike a passenger. You betrayed that sacred trust in the most flagrant way imaginable. Your claim of having a bad day is not a defense. It is an indictment of your character and your suitability for the role you held. The sentence was a meticulous dismantling of her life. 2 years of probation, a fine of $5, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory court-supervised courses in both anger management and racial sensitivity. Then came the final crushing blow. Furthermore, the judge concluded, pursuant to federal aviation security protocols, you are hereby placed on the national no-fly list for a period of 5 years. A gasp rippled through the small courtroom. It was the ultimate ruinous irony. A career flight attendant, grounded for life. But the hardest karma, the slow, grinding erosion of her existence, was delivered by the society she now had to face. The video of the slap was now a permanent stain on the internet. Her name and face were globally recognized, a shorthand for racist entitlement. Her attempts to rebuild were futile. She polished her resume, highlighting her 2 decades of experience in customer relations and team management, and applied for a manager position at a prestigious hotel chain. The initial phone screening went well, and she felt a flicker of hope. But when she walked into the in-person interview, she saw the moment of recognition in the hiring manager's eyes. The man's professional smile faltered. He rushed through his remaining questions, and his handshake was limp and quick. "We'll be in touch," he said. They never were. Her friendships built over years of layovers in distant cities withered and died. She called a colleague, a woman she'd considered her closest friend, to meet for coffee. "Oh, Heather, I'm just so swamped this month," her friend said, her voice strained with an obvious lie. "Let me call you back when things clear up." The call never came. She was a social contagion, and no one wanted to risk infection. The financial strain became a daily torment. Her husband, a quiet man who was humiliated by the public nature of the scandal, began sleeping in the guest room. One evening he sat her down at the kitchen table she could no longer afford. "I can't do this anymore, Heather," he said, his voice hollow. "My clients ask about it. Our neighbors stare when I get the mail. This isn't a storm that's going to pass. This is our life now, and it's not the life I want." The divorce was quiet and swift, another asset stripped away. The foreclosure notice arrived on a rainy Tuesday. She walked through the empty rooms of the house where she had raised her children, her footsteps echoing on the bare wood floors. This house had been her fortress, the proof that she had made it. Now its loss was the final confirmation of her complete and utter failure. She ended up in a small third-floor apartment with stained carpets and a view of a brick wall working a temporary near-minimum wage job stocking shelves at a grocery store during the graveyard shift. One morning as her shift ended, she saw a familiar uniformed figure in the checkout line. It was Captain Frank Miller. Their eyes met over a display of breakfast cereals. He looked older, wearier. For a fleeting second she saw shock, then something far worse, a deep, profound pity. He didn't sneer. He didn't look angry. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, as if mourning a loss, and quickly looked away. The pity was a judgment more damning than any hatred could ever be. It confirmed she was no longer a person to be feared or respected, but an object of sorrowful regret. Her final reckoning came during her community service. She was assigned to a downtown food bank. Her days were spent on her feet, lifting heavy crates of canned goods and packing boxes for families in need. It was exhausting, anonymous work. One afternoon, a young black woman with a tired but kind face came to the counter. As Heather handed her a heavy box of groceries, the woman smiled at her. "Thank you so much," she said. "God bless you." Heather froze her hands, still outstretched. The simple, unearned kindness struck her with the force of a physical blow. She looked at the woman, a woman who could have been a passenger on any of her flights. A woman she would have sized up and dismissed in a single glance, and saw only a shared humanity that she had spent a lifetime denying. She couldn't speak. She could only nod, turning away, as tears welled in her eyes, the full crushing weight of her karma settling upon her soul. She had fallen from 35,000 feet, and this was the ground. While Heather Jensen's life descended into a self-made abyss, Dr. Kendra Sullivan was meticulously laying the foundation for a resurrection. In the immediate aftermath, the pressure from Aura Wing's board of directors and its anxious legal team was immense and uniform fire. Heather released a strong statement and let the news cycle move on. To them, the incident was a PR crisis, to be managed, a financial liability to be contained. For Kendra, it was a gaping wound that exposed a deep systemic infection. Simply putting a bandage on it was not an option. She spent 2 days locked in the SFO corporate suite, not in frantic damage control, but in quiet, intense reflection. She reviewed the file on Heather Jensen, the 17 complaints a testament to years of ignored red flags. She read hundreds of emails from other employees, some offering support, others expressing their own frustrations with the toxic aspects of the company's seniority-obsessed culture. She realized this moment, as ugly as it was, presented a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She could either be the CEO who survived a scandal or the leader who transformed an entire organization. She chose transformation. 2 weeks later, she stood on a makeshift stage in the center of Aura Wing's largest maintenance hangar at Chicago O'Hare. The cavernous space, usually filled with the cacophony of tools and machinery, was silent, packed, with over 1,000 employees. Pilots in crisp uniforms stood with their arms crossed, their expressions unreadable. Flight attendants gathered in nervous clusters, whispering amongst themselves. Ground crew mechanics and gate agents, their faces smudged with the grime of their work, looked on with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The event was being broadcast live to every Aura Wing station around the globe. Kendra eschewed the podium, walking to the edge of the stage to be closer to them. She wore a simple, dark blue blouse and trousers, no power suit, no armor. She looked out at the sea of faces and began to speak, her voice steady and resonant, amplified by the hangar's acoustics. "Good morning. I know why you're here." She started her gaze, sweeping across the crowd. "You've seen the video, you've read the headlines, you've heard the whispers, and you're probably wondering what happens next. You're wondering what this means for our company, and for you." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "I'm not going to show you a PowerPoint presentation with our new PR strategy. I'm not here to give you corporate-approved talking points. I'm here to tell you the truth. What happened on Flight 732 was a disgrace. It was a failure of the highest order, and it happened on my watch." She then did something no one expected. She recounted the entire incident, not as a CEO, but as the passenger in seat 24B. She spoke of her initial observations of the dismissiveness, the condescension, and the final shocking act of violence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The raw honesty of her account held the massive room in rapt attention. "But here is the most important thing you need to understand," she said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. "The failure on Flight 732 was not the failure of one employee. It was the failure of a culture that allowed such behavior to fester. A culture that protected seniority over service, that tolerated microaggressions, and that failed to listen when our customers and our good employees told us something was wrong. That culture ends today." A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't the defensive, blame-shifting speech they had braced for. This was a confession and a declaration. Kendra laid out her vision. The Aura of Respect initiative wasn't just a slogan. It was a complete operational overhaul. She announced an anonymous reporting system for employee misconduct with an independent review board. She detailed a new passenger bill of rights that would empower customers. And finally, she announced, "We are creating a new mandatory training program for every single employee from the baggage ramp to the boardroom. It's called the Dr. Kendra Sullivan Empathy Training Program, and it will be the most rigorous and comprehensive in the industry." She explained the immersive VR scenarios, the workshops led by DEI experts, the focus on de-escalation and confronting unconscious bias. "And to show my commitment," she added, "I will be personally funding the initial $1 million rollout from my own salary." The silence that followed was broken by a smattering of applause from the back. It grew slowly at first, then swelling into a wave of genuine, sustained applause. The pilots were clapping. The mechanics were clapping. The flight attendants, their faces now showing relief and hope, were clapping, the loudest of all. They weren't just applauding a new program. They were applauding a leader who had chosen to heal a wound rather than just hide the scar. In the year that followed, Kendra was relentless. She was a constant presence, not as a distant executive, but as an active participant in the airline's rebirth. The public, initially hungry for scandal, became fascinated by the story of genuine corporate reform. Aura Wing's reputation transformed. Passenger satisfaction scores soared. The stock price hit an all-time high. 18 months after the incident, Kendra was on a red-eye flight from Chicago to London, reviewing quarterly reports on her tablet. The cabin was calm, the service seamless. She watched as a young flight attendant, whose name tag read Maria, knelt beside an elderly gentleman who was clearly frustrated with the entertainment system. "It's all right, sir," Maria said softly, her voice a balm of patience. "Sometimes they can be a bit tricky. Let me show you. You just tap here for movies, and you can scroll through like this. Is there anything in particular you'd like to watch?" The man, who reminded Kendra of her own father, looked up at Maria with gratitude. "Oh, thank you, dear. That's very kind of you. I'm just not very good with all this new technology." "It's my pleasure to help." Maria smiled, a genuine, unforced smile. "Let me know if you need anything else. At all." The simple act of kindness a direct and beautiful contrast to the memory of another elderly passenger being shamed for needing help with a seatbelt, caused a lump to form in Kendra's throat. Later, the lead flight attendant, Sarah, approached her seat. "Dr. Sullivan," she said in a low, respectful voice, "is there anything at all I can get for you? We're so honored to have you on board." Kendra looked up from her work and smiled. "Everything is perfect, Sarah. Truly, your team is a credit to this airline. I was just watching Maria with that passenger in row 12. That is what Aura Wing is all about." Sarah's professional demeanor softened. "Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. It really means a lot to hear that from you. They're really different now. Better. We all feel it. We feel proud again." As Sarah moved on, Kendra leaned her head back and closed her eyes. The memory of the slap, the sting on her cheek would never fully fade. It was part of her story now, part of the airline's history. But it was no longer a source of pain. It had become a catalyst, a brutal but necessary crucible from which something stronger, kinder, and more resilient had been forged. She opened her eyes and looked out the window at the endless expanse of the star-dusted night sky. The journey had been turbulent, but ahead the horizon was bright, and the sky was finally perfectly clear. If this story of instant karma and corporate justice resonated with you, and if you believe that accountability is one of the most powerful forces for change, then please help this story reach more people. The incident on Flight 732 is a stark reminder that our actions, no matter our position, have consequences that can ripple out in ways we can never predict. Dr. Kendra Sullivan didn't just fire a bad employee, she rebuilt a culture. That's a lesson we can all learn from. So please take a moment to hit that like button to show your support, share this video with your friends and family, to spread the message, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more true stories of justice, karma, and the incredible moments that change lives forever. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.